Coming up on Why Should I Trust You? A new book titled Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again, has come out the same week as news of the former president being diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. Today, we're joined by Jake Tapper, one of the authors of this new book. We wanted to ask him about how much the media knew and didn't report, about whether the Democratic Party chose to ignore repeated calls by the American people that they were concerned about Biden's frailty, and how this only fuels America's growing distrust in its leaders, institutions, the press, and just about everything else. It's a story, yes, about health, aging, and what we expect from our leaders. But from our show's perspective, it's really about who we trust, and yes, why should we trust them? And is this reckoning out in the open, one that, quite frankly, public health never faced after COVID, a painful but necessary step to start rebuilding trust? Let's get started. Welcome.
Yes, welcome.
We have a big show today. As we said, Jake Tapper is going to join us in a moment. He, of course, is both CNN anchor, chief Washington correspondent, and he's one of the authors, along with Alex Thompson, of Original Sin, which has just come out. And just, for full transparency, Jake, we worked with Jake, me, Tom, I think Mark maybe too. He's our former colleague, and we'll tell you all about that. But first, who are we? I am Brenda Adhikari.
And I'm Tom Johnson.
I'm Dr. Maggie Bartlett.
And I'm Dr. Mark.
Great. Brenda and I are journalists. Maggie is a virologist. Mark is a doctor and a medical reporter.
So guys, listen, our listeners may be wondering, how does this book and this topic kind of fit into our podcast lane? And I mean, I think quite simply at its root, this book is about trust, and this topic is about trust, and our show is about trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And we as listeners now know, we track the breakdown in trust that's occurred and obviously for us, the lane that we're focused on is public health and science and medical research and incredible, things that are occurring in that space because of that breakdown in trust. One of the big areas where trust was broken down has to do with the Oval Office and the President of the United States. It's one of the big institutions. And, we've talked about Trump's handling of COVID and what that did to trust. And today's a chance to talk about the Democratic president, Joe Biden, and what he did that also, contributed to our breakdown in trust.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I've been texting with a few of our listeners who are, and just to give them a heads up that we're going to have Tapper on, like what would they want us to ask him, and particularly people who are a little bit skeptical of institutions. And this has come out in the book tour already for him, as we've all seen, that like the media itself is also under fire in the story, and for good reason. And I think we're going to talk about that kind of why should we trust what Jake has to say about this particular moment is also something we've looked into about the media itself. So I think it's going to be a good conversation, but like we like to do, let's set the table. And how do we kind of get to this moment of even talking about this, Tom?
Yeah. So just to take us back in time, we all remember Joe Biden's disastrous and really sad debate appearance back on June 27th, which was on CNN, and Jake Tapper is one of the moderators of that. And we all remember his real struggle to put together coherent points. You remember the famous line now, "We finally beat Medicare." There was that collective freak out, and then 24 days later, Joe Biden had dropped out of the race. But, here's the thing. That debate did a lot of things, but one thing it did not do was suddenly open Americans' eyes to the fact that Joe Biden's age and did not open their eyes to the fact that he was becoming increasingly frail. And that was a concern that the American public had been onto for quite some time. YouGov and The Economist had been polling for a year before the debate on that very question. They asked Americans, how do you think Biden's age will impact his ability to perform as president? And he got really low marks, and that was very consistent. Was he too old to effectively serve another 4-year term? Back in August of 2023, 77% of Americans said yes, that he was too old to serve another 4-year term.
Boy.
Yeah, almost a year before the debate. And this didn't just pop up that summer. This had been building, really, after the earliest days of his term.
Right.
So the debate performance was like a wheels came off moment, but it was really a wheels came off the bus moment for party elites, for the media, but not for the American people.
I just want to underscore that because I think what you're saying is like part of what is really hard for people to stomach right now is this idea that they didn't know that this was a problem, that the people themselves weren't very visibly aware that this president was in some sort of state of decline or aging to in a way that was making them very concerned, that they knew it. Why weren't politicians and the media on top of that?
No, I mean, after the debate, the Biden team tried to spin the press and by extension, really the American public on this. I mean, that's of course what every, presidential campaign and White House communications office does. They spin, they analyze, they frame it how the way they want you to see it. And, they came out, they said the debate was, quote, not his best night. And they offered what they called explanations and not really excuses. First it was he had a cold, and then he had jet lag, and then he, had to fulfill the duties of being commander in chief. And then he over prepared for the debate. And all of that meant he had a really crushing schedule. And the debate was at, I think 9 o'clock at night. And it was, past his peak performance time. We saw a similar spin after the special counsel Robert Hur released his report about Biden's handling of classified materials. I mean, Hur sat with the president, it was for hours and hours, and eventually concluded that a jury would just see the president as a, quote, sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Again, that also set off a firestorm. Like, wait, what is her seeing? And all of these Democratic voices came out and, to what you're saying, Brenda, was saying, no, wait, nothing to see here. The Biden that I see in private was as sharp as a tack. I mean, if you hear like the montage on like conservative media of them playing sharp, and this is coming off the heels of we just watched the debate. What are you talking about, sharp? A lot of those people were giving cover, though. They were basically saying, well, when I was in the room with him, he was sharp. It was fine. I wasn't around him a lot, but everything I saw was great. John Ossoff, the senator from Georgia, said Biden was focused, impressive, formidable, and effective. But, like Tom said, the spin wasn't landing. Americans had already spotted the deterioration with their own eyes.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in and say one thing, because look, I understand if you're listening to this, because I've wrestled with this in the last couple of days, guys. We've texted about it, right? Like, here's a guy who's just been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. It is a very difficult thing for a family to have to go through. I know this. I've had family members, very close family members, go through it. It's like everyone's kind of wrestling with how do we talk about a topic of whether or not Joe Biden's team was upfront about his decline, wrestling that with the fact that he now has this aggressive form of cancer. I'd like to think as a society, we can talk about two things at the same time, giving the respect that this man deserves at a time of just a great challenge for him and his family, while at the same time discuss what was the American people just feel like was not an honest moment for our country.
Yeah. This moment of reckoning's it's happening. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Obviously, a lot of Democrats are feeling not only furious that this reckoning's happening, they say, look at the other guy, look at the alternative. I would have taken Joe Biden in any condition over what I'm seeing
The whole
with
paper
Trump.
bag thing. Yeah, like I'd
Sure.
take a paper bag over Donald Trump.
And yet we're focusing, now in May of 2025 back on the former president when democracy is in incredible, threatening waters right now. But the reckoning's happening. And yes, the cancer diagnosis is terrifically sad. He served this country, but it can't be put back in the bottle. A lot of Americans, as Mark said, saw through the spin. It's interesting when you look at the aging of America. A lot of Americans today are taking care of elderly parents. The University of Michigan does a national poll on healthy aging, and it found that more than half of Americans 50 years and older today are actually a caregiver for one or more. I couldn't believe the or more elderly people in their lives. And anyone who's done this becomes sort of the primary caregiver of an elderly parent or loved one or neighbor. It's brutal. I mean, beyond like, hey, we're going to take the car keys away, which is a wrenching moment in anyone's relationship. But it's the day in and day out jobs of like taking care of that parent, medical appointments, reminders, safety, grocery shopping, everything and anything. And,
not just like a to-do list. It becomes like emotionally consuming.
Yeah.
Right. And what is the impact that has on you? And then what does that do to your judgment and like how you approach everything else? But go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
Right. And I just think Americans have become sort of experts on this subject and they can see it. So when they watch
Yes,
Biden
Tom, it is.
struggling to walk
Yes.
to a helicopter or fiddling with his papers or staring out into space, they know it. I mean, and again, like the kind of the BS detector is like on high. You can't pass this off. And they were telling pollsters for years that they saw this and they were deeply concerned about it.
Boy, that is so true. I remember talking to somebody who, like, after the debate, they were like, I just drove to see my, like, 80-something-year-old mother. I know what's happening here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important point, is that unlike other stuff that maybe the American people, it's harder for them to access what goes on inside the Oval Office, the Situation Room, cover-ups, whatever. An aging parent, like you said, people are experts in this country.
Yeah.
President Biden has a diagnosis of stage 4 prostate cancer, which I'm hoping, Mark, you can enlighten us a little bit more about what that means as a cancer doctor.
One thing that struck me as a doctor is that, his team put out a statement yesterday that he hasn't had a PSA, which is the blood test that you test for as a screening tool for prostate cancer. He hasn't had one since 2014.
But is that, Mark, that's crazy, right? I mean, wouldn't I picture the president of the United States in the White House, like getting, checkups like every week or two. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
How
I mean,
often do people typically recommend those? Are they annual screenings when you get to a certain age?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, at a high level, look, you're right. Everybody would think that the president has access to, talk about concierge medicine, take it up 4 notches beyond that. I mean, executive wellness. I mean, he has access to the Walter Reed Hospital, which in the name of Walter Reed Hospital is the president's hospital. Screening tools that I'm about to describe, all of those rules apply to the 4 of us and all of our listeners. When you're the president, one military doctor told me all that just goes out the window. Really, after your age 70, the chances of you getting a really aggressive form of prostate cancer that's going to matter in terms of treatment and changing the course of your life are very low, right? So at some point we say, look, all this testing that we're going to do, all it's going to do is increase your anxiety. You're going to get a false positive. We're going to give you unnecessary procedures, and it's not going to matter in the end. So if you've made it to 70, you get your ticket out of here. You don't have to have your PSA checked anymore. Now, if you're 55 to 69, you had to have a conversation with your doctor and when to start and how often to check. But if you're interested in longevity and maybe perhaps running for president, like, you're very interested in what that PSA is. And it is very surprising to most doctors, even though we know all these caveats, that there wasn't a PSA being checked. But it is possible that they just never looked under the hood and they didn't see that result. And the calculation, unfortunately, backfired in this situation because, again, we just said that it typically doesn't matter, but here we are, and it actually does matter. So if his PSA had been checked, perhaps they would have identified that he has this aggressive form. And maybe, something could have been done before it spread to his bones. But, even though it's spread to his bones and it sounds really scary, stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer, even with all of that, his prognosis is still quite good. He's still going to go on this hormone treatment to stop the cancer's growth. And there's a pretty good chance he's not even going to die of this prostate cancer. So he's not that, out there in terms of being an anomaly because of this diagnosis at his age.
Right. But of course, it's added, yet another layer to this reckoning of, did he know about this years ago? Did he have this diagnosis while president and didn't tell the American public? We don't know the answer to that, but
they say no.
swirling. They say no.
The statement they put out is definitely they say no. He did not have a diagnosis before Friday of last week, and he's never had a PSA since 2014.
Right.
Well, look, I think that this sets the stage for our conversation with Jake Tapper, and when we come back, we will speak to Jake. Okay, welcome back. And we are back with Jake Tapper. Jake, welcome to Why Should I Trust You?
Hi, it's so great to see you guys again, and some old familiar faces. Only one old familiar face, but familiar faces, and then some new faces too. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I mean, we should just tell the audience, like, full disclosure, we all work with Jake at ABC News about, I think, 120 years ago.
Yes.
125, 130.
Yeah, maybe 130 years ago. But listen, Jake, we're talking about the now. We're talking about
Yes.
2025.
Yeah.
You and your colleague, Alex Thompson from Axios, well, you're at CNN, Alex Thompson, Axios, brand new book, Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. It's available right now. We're really happy to have you.
It's so great to be here. Thanks so much.
So my first question is, are you enjoying this book tour?
No, not at all. First of all, let me just say,
Yeah.
the subject of the book is deeply awful. Like, I mean, it is aging. It is somebody becoming addled, and it's a cover-up. None of those things are fun to talk about. I wish they hadn't happened. So that's one. Two, I've never seen anything like what I'm experiencing from the far left and the far right. It's just wild stuff. All of a sudden, the New York Post considers Hunter Biden a credible source of information. It's just wild stuff.
Yeah.
Well, look, let's just get some shit. Yeah, let's just get some shit out of the way. The biggest critiques are, why the fuck did it take so long for the media to report on something that the public was seeing so clearly with their own eyes? And actually, Tom Johnson had laid out, polling from YouGov and The Economist that over 70% of the country were like, this man is fucking old and this is not a good thing. And the second, that you, Jake Tapper, you're not a good messenger for this because you took part in this alleged cover-up by working with mainstream media and not going after it hard enough. So go for it.
Okay. Number one, it is true that the whole country saw President Biden aging, and the whole country saw clips that we in the media aired and people on websites posted of Joe Biden messing up names and tripping and seeming old. There's no question about that. And the American people voted for Joe Biden thinking he was too old. That was, in fact, part of the reason, I believe, why his campaign leaked the idea, put the idea out into the public that he would only be a one-term president, and why he referred to himself as a bridge to the next generation. So that's true. I would argue that there is something different about knowing that and talking about his age as a political liability and learning what was actually going on behind the scenes that was much worse and much more disturbing than what we saw in front of the cameras. So that's one. And I do think our book achieves that by having, we talked to more than 200 Democratic insiders, people who liked Joe Biden, but were upset about what happened and what they saw. And more to the point, this level of detail as to what was going on behind the scenes was not provided to me and my co-author, Alex Thompson, until after the election, because the Democrats had convinced themselves that only Joe Biden could beat Donald Trump, and that anything that called into question his ability to do the job was helping Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump posed an existential threat to the nation. So that with that in mind, they could justify anything. After the election, the sword of Damocles has fallen. That's no longer a question. Trump's won. It doesn't matter. All of a sudden, all these people that had been telling us for months, if not years, he's fine, he's fine, he's fine. Behind the scenes, he's sharp as a tack. He's amazing. He's running circles around us. All that stuff. All of those people were suddenly returning our calls and our texts and our emails and willing to talk to us and tell us the truth. I would have loved to have broken the story in real time that Joe Biden did not recognize George Clooney at that fundraiser in June 2024. And nobody who knows me, and two of you know me, could think that I would let that scoop go unclaimed without rushing on air and announcing it to the world. This is just not how journalists are wired. Of course I would want to do that. But I didn't know it until after the election because of how Democrats justified this all to themselves. So that's two. And point three, we're all flawed. I can't point to very many members of the legacy media who did an excellent and admirable job covering this story. I could point to Siobhan Hughes and Annie Linsky of the Wall Street Journal. I could point to some other reporters here and there. And certainly conservative media were talking about this at all. I don't know how much they were breaking any news on it, but they certainly were talking about it and raising the important issues. I don't think I reject the idea that I was part of any cover-up. I certainly asked Joe Biden about whether he would be transparent about his health in 2020. The only interview I got with him during his presidency, I pointed out that the American people thought he was too old. He says, watch me, and they're watching. And I said, they're watching you. They still think you're too old. And he gave his answer. Do I, in retrospect, wish I had pressed more on this issue, covered it more now that I know how bad it was behind the scenes? Of course I do. But I honestly don't think that makes me particularly different from any other member of the legacy media, with a handful of exceptions.
I think, and I want you to tell me what you think about this. I think what happens in newsrooms and newsroom cultures, because this happens, I've seen it happen with my own eyes at CBS News, at ABC News. Mm-hmm. There is a tendency, I think this happens at Fox, that we do have our biases.
Of course.
And we do have things that when you have somebody that we have decided is dangerous, Donald Trump, whoever has decided is dangerous, that do we actually, and I genuinely want to know this, do we actually hold ourselves back from asking the tough questions of his opposition? That we almost tell ourselves we're not going to go there because the other guy is so bad.
I certainly think that played a role overall in the news media not covering this as much as we should have. I don't think that played a role in my coverage of it, just because I know my political biases, and I am not a Democrat, and I'm not a Republican, and I'm not a Democrat. And I think, honestly, my biases, I hate them all. I mean, so that's not the reason. And my perspective on, I've been covering Joe Biden since 2001 was the first time I interviewed him. And, I'm not like a fan. If anybody ever, if somebody wants to go through my coverage and say, like, you were really soft on John McCain in the year 2000, I can say, okay, yeah, that I kind of bought the myth in 2000 when I was like coming up. I'll plead guilty to that.
Like veteran, decorated war hero.
Yeah, but also like that campaign, it was, I was just talking about this with John Dickerson of CBS yesterday, because Dickerson and I like got seats on the Straight Talk Express and like had a relationship with him. It was very intoxicating. He was also this underdog and really had no chance of winning, and he had this compelling personal story and just whatever. But anyway, my only point is, like, if somebody wants to accuse me of bias when it comes to John McCain in 2000, guilty as charged. I get it. I read my coverage. I can see, why people thought that, and but I don't think that it's really possible to look at my Biden coverage and think that this guy loves Joe Biden. I mean, they hated me, to be frank. They hated me to begin with, because I've been critical of him.
Not that you love Joe Biden, but that there was a unity in newsrooms about how dangerous Donald Trump was.
I think I think that's part of it. I think that's a fair critique of the news media in general. I'm just saying I don't think that was a fair critique of me in general, me specifically. But I will also say there are other things going on. One of them is the health issues are really difficult to report on. I mean, I think this week's news, the horrible news that President Biden has prostate cancer and he's battling it. And obviously everybody on this call, and I'm sure everybody listening and watching, agrees, like, our thoughts and prayers go with him. We hope he beats it, all that. But like, health issues are really tough to report on. And one of the reasons is, first of all, we don't have subpoena power. We don't know what's going on. Second of all, people are not transparent about health, not just politicians, but anybody.
So true.
I mean, like, whatever. George Wendt died yesterday. I'd met him, great guy. Like, but it's not like we had been alerted as to his health. It's a horrible example, but I'm just saying, like, people are not forward leaning when it comes to getting out all their health information, whether it's George Wendt or Joe Biden. And I get that those are not the same person, but I'm just saying, like, it's intensely personal. People don't want to share it. Tom, you and I went through this when Peter died. Peter Jennings. I didn't even know. I mean, I knew he was sick, but even being a reporter who loved Peter and worked for ABC News and all that stuff, I wasn't aware of how sick he was until they announced he was dead.
Yeah. People, you love someone, you want to protect them, and that means you want to protect their privacy. I think we also all lie to ourselves. We don't want to age. We don't want to accept we're aging.
He's gonna beat it.
We avoid doctors. We avoid diagnoses. We're all guilty of this. It's just when you become the commander in chief,
right? I think there's an obligation to be transparent, and I think that's one of the things I hope this book achieves is underlining to the American people, like, we cannot allow presidents to be opaque about their health. Donald Trump shares almost nothing about his health records.
Yep.
And while he is out there and we see him talking and all that, unlike Biden, who was much more sequestered, that's not optimal. So I do think that the idea of the sensitivity of this, like the very fact that I'm even out there talking about my book, a few days after this diagnosis, people are calling me a monster. And it's just like I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, first of all, these pub dates are locked in 6 months ahead of time, et cetera. But beyond that, like, it doesn't really change anything about the message of the book.
Yeah.
Like,
let's talk about that. As you mentioned, you're being called a monster. There's a lot of folks on the left who say, why are we having this conversation? Democracy is under threat right now, and you guys are worried about the former guy. Like, give me a break. What kind of universe are we in? I'm just curious if you think, despite this protest that we're seeing, that in the end, this kind of reckoning is actually good for the Democratic Party. When we cover public health and COVID and all of the confusion and anger that kind of came out of that time period, there's never been a real honest reckoning for public health. I mean, how do you see this actually as a painful but ultimately good thing for the party?
So first of all, I'm so with you on the COVID thing, and I've had a couple doctors who have written books, and well, not just doctors. I've had a few people who have written books about this on my show, and like no, I'm the one that wants to talk about it. Like,
everyone's gone underground, and
but also like my staff, it's like, do the American people really want to talk about this? Is this gonna be compelling for our viewers? Like, it's not today; it's what happened in 2020, 2021. And I'm like, we need to have a reckoning about this because so many decisions were wrong.
Just so you know, Joe Rogan talks about COVID more than like anyone I know right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that reckoning is important. I don't know how much the American people want to have it. That's true. Obviously, Joe Rogan has 100 million listeners and viewers, and like, so his people do. But not everybody does, I guess. But like, I agree that reckoning needs to happen. On the Biden thing, the Democratic Party needs to have a reckoning on this the same way the Republican Party needed to have a reckoning on Iraq. A mistake. There were deceptions used, bullying used. The media was too compliant, and on and on and on. And I feel like there was a semi-reckoning on that, if only with the election of Barack Obama. And then
And weirdly, Trump. Like Trump and Hegseth are like anti-Iraq war, which is, again, it's like we're living in a crazy timeline.
Yeah.
I mean, and Jake, what about the media's reckoning? What about your reckoning in terms of you know more, you do better? How are you shifting? How are you changing? How do you, as a reporter, look, we all cover, politics, and, like you said, there's no transparency in health coverage. And you're knocking on the door, you're not getting the answers that you should be getting. Nobody's confirming you that he has, an image that shows this, or an injury that shows this, or a CAT scan that shows that. But there's something there, and you need to do your job. Like, where's your reckoning? How do you move forward? Especially, like you mentioned, look, like Trump isn't really releasing a lot of information. He, I think, is this, second oldest president or the oldest president to be inaugurated.
Yeah, oldest president to be inaugurated. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have a show to put on in the next, weeks and months. What are you going to do?
Look, first of all, for the question on why aren't you covering Trump instead of this book, like, I cover Trump every day for 2 hours, every other Sunday for an hour. Like, I mean, I do, and we're covering it. I will say covering Trump in the second term is different from covering Trump in the first term because there's just a lot more policy to cover. We're focused on the tariffs, and we're focused on the deportations, and we're focused on, other things like that, which is different than the first term. It was more the wild swirl and covering the tweets and just the surprise that everybody was feeling about his being elected to begin with. But I am covering Trump, and so is Alex every day, my co-author, Alex Thompson of Axios. I don't buy the dichotomy being presented. The other thing is, so I interviewed, have you guys seen Good Night and Good Luck yet?
Not on stage.
I
saw the movie.
No.
At the end of the entire play is based, as you know, on Edward R. Murrow and his war with Joe McCarthy and his internal struggles with CBS News, interestingly enough.
I'd say.
And it all takes place in 1954, except at the very end, Clooney reprises Murrow's famous box of wires and lights, or wires and lights in a box speech, which is basically like the power of television and what can television do. And then there's a big montage of television clips through the years, the moon landing, the Kennedy assassination, this and that. And it ends with some clips of Republicans lying about the 2020 election and Democrats lying about Joe Biden's acuity. And I asked George Clooney, I did an interview with him for CNN, and I also did one for the New Yorker for the excerpt we have from the book. And I said, why was that important to you to include those clips of the acuity? And George Clooney obviously famously wrote this op-ed calling for Biden to step out of the race. He said it was important because we need to speak truth to power to Democrats and Republicans. And I said, well, what about all your fans? What about all the people who come to Broadway? Not really a MAGA crowd necessarily. And they're like, how can you be talking about this when Trump's in the White House? And he said, how do you think we got Trump? The idea that Democrats perpetuated this lie that Joe Biden put himself forward to run for re-election when he was not capable of managing the campaign in 2024, as evidenced by his performance at the debate. And is there anyone who can seriously tell me that they think Joe Biden is ready to be president through January 2029? Because that is what he was doing. He was running to be president until January 2029. Is there anybody who thinks that? Because that lie that he was capable of doing that is, I think, part of the albatross hanging around the neck of the Democratic Party.
Let's get into the book, because look, I want you to take a minute to give us what were the most persuasive pieces of evidence to show that this wasn't just a natural course of aging and people are kind of going after a guy who, and I'll tell you the one that really struck me was the idea of these very choreographed, orchestrated cabinet meetings, which I always thought was, look, I'm sure there's some element of choreography and orchestration to all of them, but the idea that these aren't just a room full of his advisors being able to have honest, frank conversations with their guy about like what's going on. Talk to us about that. And what are some other examples that are more than just, yeah, okay, he's old?
So I think one of the things that's most important for readers to contemplate is that this book is about what Democrats saw. This book is not about what I think or what my co-author Alex thinks. This is not about our opinion. This is about what Democrats saw, the evidence they presented to us. I'm not here saying Joe Biden is a bad person. I'm not here saying Joe Biden was a good president or a bad president. I was on Morning Joe this morning, and they started off like basically trying to get me to agree that like he was a historically good president, and like it's really not for me to say. I mean, like, he obviously has accomplishments he can point to. The polling suggested the American people were not enamored with it, but whatever. That's history will decide that later on. All I'm saying is this is what we were told by insiders, including cabinet secretaries. And the cabinet secretaries told us that those cabinet meetings from the very jump were weird, that they were scripted, not just the parts that were in front of cameras. They were intensely scripted to the point that they didn't even understand why they had them. And then October 2023, this is when Biden really significantly begins to deteriorate, according to everyone we talked to, except for his closest aides, who still think that he's fit as a fiddle. Even now, they think that he should never have been run off the ticket, and he could be president until January 2029. Those cabinet meetings were weird. And then after October 2023, when our reporting indicates he really started to deteriorate, cabinet secretaries told us for the book, like, they cut off access to Biden. They didn't let him talk to the members of the cabinet, except for Lloyd Austin and Tony Blinken, who are national security folks. And they called it weird. They said they thought that they were trying to hide Biden from them. One of the cabinet secretaries did see Biden once during that period, described him as disoriented and out of it. And I mean, this is just disturbing stuff. This is not a lot of Democrats up there. I never voted for Elon. I never voted for Elon. Okay, fair enough. Did you vote for this? Did you vote for a bunch of senior aides essentially controlling the decision-making process and hiding the president from even his own administration? Because that seems weird to me.
Do you think in some ways that having someone like Donald Trump, who is such a radical figure, transformative figure, just somebody who blows shit up so huge, is almost giving cover for establishment, for Democrats, for public health, for whoever, to be like, we can't worry about our own problems because we got to fight that. Yeah. And in a way, it's almost giving a pass to people to have to come up with that blue sky, like if we could have a choice, if we had a real primary, who would we pick? If we had a choice to make a healthcare system, you see what I'm doing? I'm going back and forth between these two things. Like it's almost giving cover. Like talk to me about that. Like, is there something very convenient about having somebody like Trump to always be this foil that we're going to always make it about him?
I've spent a lot of the last couple days answering questions about my role as a basic cable late afternoon host, about my role in propping up Biden, which I told you, I don't think is an accurate thing to say, although I wish I had been much more aggressive, but I did cover it. I have said more about my role than the entire Democratic Party apparatus has said about their role. And they knew stuff that I did not. My fault is not pressing harder. Like I pressed, but I didn't press harder. And I wish that I had been able to break these stories, not in this book, but throughout the presidency. But no one was. I mean, even the journalism that was great at the time, like from the Wall Street Journal in June of last year, et cetera,
Yeah.
scratch the surface. Not
Do you think
not their
right-wing
fault.
media, like with Megyn Kelly, do you think because she will claim, and she did with you, that they were on top of it?
But they were on top of it in like an observational way. Like, look at this clip. Let's look at it again. They weren't breaking news. And that Wall Street Journal piece, I think the only people who went on the record were Republicans.
That's
So,
true.
right? I mean, it
That's
wasn't
not
like anybody.
Yeah, that's not Annie and Siobhan's fault though. Like
No,
we went
that-
back and re-reported what they reported, and like we were able to get people to at least talk as House Democrats in that about that meeting about Ukraine.
What was everybody so scared about? Was it the power of the
I don't
Biden
know.
high command? Was it the
Uh,
fear of Trump could win? If I say something, it'll be my fault.
I think largely it was. I think largely it was the Democratic argument. Joe Biden is the only one that's beaten Trump. Joe
Right.
Biden is the nominee.
This
That-
isn't great, but it's the best we got, and here we are.
Yeah, Trump's an
Yeah.
existential threat, and in this managing world, like we have to be with Biden because if you're not with Biden, you're with Trump. And even today, reporting this book, talking about this book does not excuse anything Donald Trump does or says or whatever. It's just about this incident, this cover up in American history. And even today, people look at it that way. Why are you talking about this? Why are you not talking about Trump? And I mean, it's a twisted way to look at the world, I
Yeah,
think.
I agree. And I think like let's just even we're not about that here. Like we've established why we're talking about this. And I want to go through let's paint a different scenario. Let's imagine how this could have gone that would have actually listened to the American people and what they were saying in the polls. Help me understand that, Jake. Like, how could this have gone better? At what point was it when he said he's the bridge person? Like, when was that moment where it could have been like you chose turning right instead of turning left at the floor?
Choose your own adventure. Where is
Yeah.
the choose your own adventure?
Yes.
novel? We're dating ourselves, but yes. So the choose your own adventure moment is after the midterms of 2022, which go better for Democrats than expected. In my view, and the view of many political analysts whom I respect, that was largely because of two things. One, the Dobbs decision, which energized Democrats to go to the polls in November 2022. And second, the fact that Donald Trump had gone into a bunch of Republican primaries and backed not the person that had the best chance of winning the Senate seat or the House seat, but the person who was most loyal to him, which made the Senate races much more competitive, and Democrats actually did better than expected because of that. In any case, the Biden people take that as a huge confirmation. Even though polling suggests the otherwise, the Biden people take that as a huge confirmation. We're doing the right thing. The American people support Joe Biden, even if the polls don't reflect that. The voters just voted overwhelmingly, or it wasn't the red wave everybody.
Yeah, right.
I mean, they lost the House, but I think they maybe even gained a seat in the Senate. I'm not sure, but in any case, it was relatively good for a midterm for Democrats. And at that point, what should have happened is all of Biden's trusted advisors and the family should have had a thorough meeting about, look, our polling is bad. The president is 79. He just forgot the name of Jake Sullivan and Kate Bedingfield in the middle of the day in December 2022. Like he's starting to really show signs of aging. Is he really capable of being president until the age of 86? What is best for the country? What is best for the party? Let's talk about this. Let's have a frank and honest conversation. That never happened. There was no meeting like that. Biden just decided he was running, and that was the end of that. There were people internally who wondered if that was wise, but they did not say it to him. Anita Dunn said, "Are we sure this is a good idea?" Jeff Zients, who became the chief of staff in early 2023, guy from Bain Capital, a guy who loves data, he comes in. He's kind of surprised that this premise, this that Biden is running for re-election, has not been stress test, as the business folks referred to it. But the decision's been made, and he's the chief of staff. So what's he supposed to do? Is his thinking? John Anzalone, a pollster who's been with Biden since 1987, says, and his truth telling has caused him to kind of be shunted aside by the Politburo, the folks running the White House. He says to Anita Dunn, "Are we like we're going to poll on this, right?" But this is before the announcement's been made in April 2023, and Anita says, "No, the decision's been made. We're not polling on this." So that is the moment. That is the time when somebody should have said, "This is not a good idea." That's the first choose your own adventure moment. The second one comes in June 2023 when Hunter's plea deal falls apart. Joe Biden is legitimately terrified that because Hunter's saying the Republicans are out to get me, they're trying to have me, he obviously struggles with addiction. They're trying to get me to relapse. They're trying to get me to kill myself. This is this is how he handles it internally. And Joe Biden is legitimately, understandably terrified that he's going to lose a third child. He's already lost Beau. He's already lost his daughter in 1972 in that horrible car accident. He's terrified of that. And there is huge psychic stress on him that also causes his diminishment. That's another opportunity that Democrats have to say, "Boss, we don't think you're up to this," which is, by the way, what Obama told Biden in 2015 after Beau died, which is the first time that there really was some sort of psychic loss. One top aide describing it like water being poured on sand. Obama told him, I don't think this is good for you. You have to do what's good for you personally." And Biden always carried that grudge and is still mad at Biden to this day for not supporting him running for president in 2016. Biden has surrounded himself by yes men. Biden has surrounded himself by people who believe the Biden myth, who believe the Biden theology, that this man cannot be defeated. He can beat anything. So there's no one who's going to say that to him in this choose your own adventure. There's no one who's going to say, you really need to reconsider this.
And I would say, as a culture, I think we do struggle with like taking the car keys away from our elderly.
So much. It's
right.
painful.
Like,
Yeah,
I think it's something. And not only that, Jake, we've got senators in their fucking 90s. OK, we've got, I mean, Chuck Grassley.
Literally. Yes.
I have to every once in a while check my Wikipedia for Chuck Grassley to be like, is that guy still alive? Not only is alive, Nebraska, Maggie Bartlett. My goodness. Oh, wait, is he Nebraska? I have to, right? He's Nebraska.
Iowa.
Oh, shit. Okay, I got to edit that out. Fuck. Okay, whatever. But point is that
big touch, Iowa, Nebraska.
Yeah. Okay.
Not crazy.
Whatever. I'm an immigrant. All that to say that, like, is that playing a role in this? That
100%.
That like, as much as I like to say that the country was like, he's aging, we don't actually call out people for aging in this country. It's just like not something, like, where are the examples of that?
We don't. I mean, Kay Granger, who was chair of the House Appropriations Committee, I believe, in June 2024, stepped down as chair and then like checked herself in, or the family checked her into a home for people with dementia. And she continued, she continued to draw a congressional salary, and she continued to serve as the member of Congress representing her district in Texas. And the only reason we know it is because some reporter in Texas tracked it down and figured it out. But it's not like, by the way, Republican leaders in the House didn't know this.
Dianne Feinstein.
Dianne Feinstein, Thad Cochran. There's a whole chapter in this called in the book about this called "The Most Privileged Nursing Home in the World," which is a quote that Nikki Haley gave after the first time Mitch McConnell froze up.
Yeah.
And yeah, we have a gerontocracy. And you know what this is the first conclave I ever got excited about because I think because of I'm Jewish, so I don't, whatever, like it's not like been part of my life. But I think because of the movie Conclave, just like illustrated the cool politics going on. I'm like, oh my God, I've
The
been
timing, just insane.
but also just I just completely missed that this is about politics more than it's about religion in some ways. Anyway, so this conclave is the first one I paid serious attention to, and I was stunned to find out that in 1970 the Pope made a rule that if you're over 80, you cannot, as a cardinal, you cannot participate in the conclave. You're too old for the conclave. Yeah. So the
The
Vatican,
fucking Catholic Church
yes,
has an age limit.
they are way smarter than the American political institution on this stuff. Way smarter, way more
Well,
forward.
this Pope is what? He's in his 60s, right? He's like a child.
He's young.
69 or 70 maybe, but I
Mark,
mean,
you've talked about like, shouldn't there be a commission that like
Yeah, I
gets
mean,
into like rules for this, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, if you look at it, it's like there is no set, framework for us to assess somebody's cognitive ability if you're president. I mean, you completely rely on the president's doctors to release what they want to release. And, you can decide if you want to give them a cognitive test or not. We've heard that a million times. And, even we were covering all of this last summer. I remember it was all about, does Biden have Parkinson's? And we were just so laser focused on, does he have Parkinson's? There was like rumors, there was a Parkinson's expert that came into the White House. And, what was happening, through all of that, we don't know. I mean, I don't know, Jake, in your book, did you in your research, did you hear any specifics, any nuggets of information that there were things that would actually warrant, the phrase cover up? Like, was there something, beyond the obvious that we saw all the diminishment and the decline? Is there anything that was a smoking gun that was truly a cover up?
well, I think that there was a cover up in what we uncovered, but if you're saying, was there a visit to a doctor who diagnosed with him with Parkinson's and that report was shredded? No. We were not able to find evidence of anything like that. But by the same token, there's a lot of stuff going on with Joe Biden's health that we obviously don't know about. Until I completely agree with you, there needs to be, I think, a law mandating that presidents have to disclose White House complete physicals to the American people and this is in the book, we have Jonathan Reiner, who's a doctor, who's a consultant to the White House medical team, who says it needs to be done under oath. It needs to be done under penalty of perjury, because there's no incentive for the White House physician to be honest, other than, Hippocratic oath and ethics and all that. But there's no demand. There's no, I mean, you can look at some of the reports that we heard during the first Trump administration about his weight or whatever and his health that were just like not even medical. I mean, Dr. Ronnie Jackson was saying things like, this is the healthiest man who's ever lived. I mean, just not medical descriptions of him. And I'm not disputing his health, but they weren't even medical. It's one of the weirdest things about politics is, look, when I get too old or addled to do TV, CNN will let me know, right? That's going to happen. We've seen that happen to other anchors. When an actor becomes not watchable anymore, generally speaking, there is a system that will stop hiring that person.
Or they like marry a 25-year-old and they have a baby with them.
what?
Dude, Al Pacino, I'm just saying. I didn't mean to break
Jake
your
was
flow.
saying they don't get cast as the leading kind of dad anymore. They're the grandpa.
sorry.
If they can't recite their lines, they don't get cast anymore.
Right. Sorry, I didn't mean to break
You're
your flow.
an athlete and you can't hit anymore. They're not going to hire you. I mean, like if you're a CEO, the board will get rid of you. If you're a professor, the college will tell you to retire, and on and on and on. But politicians are only answerable, only accountable to the voters, and can be snookered. And that is the problem, because Kay Granger's constituents, they're living their lives. They're trying to pay for groceries. They're not paying attention to where Kay Granger is at any given moment. They rely on Kay Granger and the system around Kay Granger to tell the truth. And all the more so for Joe Biden. But you can't have a system that depends on the honor system if it's being run by people who have no honor.
And look, I would say that's why having a really robust press corps that is serving as a reminder to the public of what is happening in government that they need to be aware of is even more important. Here's the one. You mentioned Iraq war as a reckoning, Biden as a reckoning. Here's another reckoning that I'd like you to kind of humor me on, which is it comes up a lot in our conversations with people who sort of mistrust institutions and right-wing media in general who say this, which is the coverage of Russia and Mueller, okay, is an example of folks like CNN, MSNBC being so enamored of the idea that Trump may have colluded with Vladimir Putin that was what we were seeing on television every night. Mueller said no collusion. And the real story was that you had a country like Russia that was clearly intervening in our election, clearly fucking shit up. Clearly their military intelligence unit was hacking into the DNC and all that stuff. They feel like you guys lost their trust by going after the wrong story and not enough on the right story, and that things like this erode trust. Help me understand that.
I understand why they feel that way. I mean, I understand why they feel that way about any number of stories that have happened in the last 20 years, 25 years, where the coverage was not perfect. I mean, I would certainly not lump CNN's coverage and MSNBC's coverage as the same.
You think they went harder in that direction of like creating this like impression that there was collusion?
I think there's a lot of fault to find in every news organization's coverage of the Mueller investigation. Everyone. But look, I get it. I mean, I think there are a few competing things going on. One, there was an FBI investigation into the president. I mean, and I don't know a world in which an FBI investigation into a sitting president is not a major story. Two, there was evidence that, as you note, that Russia was trying to interfere with the election and that Russia was trying to make inroads with the Trump campaign. Three, as you note, Mueller concluded there was no prosecutable evidence of a conspiracy. But four, he did suggest that there was quite a bit of evidence of attempts to suborn justice to stop the investigation. So, the idea that like this was all made up and there was nothing to see.
No, it's the breathless, constant breaking news, like as though the Challenger just blew up coverage that I think people have problems with. And I've heard you own up to that. I've heard you say that you're not sure that that was warranted either.
But do you wonder, like, where's the reckoning for the far right on things like the big lie? Like when you're getting hit on, where were you, Jake, reporting on Biden? Or what did you report on Mueller? Are you thinking to yourself, okay, if we're all going to have a reckoning here in the media, what about those that, supported ran with the big lie?
Look, there are any number of falsehoods that have been peddled on the right. And certainly there have been, I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, remember when the right was focused on the fact that Hillary Clinton was going to die at any moment in 2016, and there was a huge cover up about her health, and she was basically zombie and like that was a huge issue in the 2016 campaign. And while obviously she did have there was some sort of health thing going on, and I don't think that they were transparent about what was going on, and they certainly weren't.
This is the famous 9/11 anniversary where she collapses into the car.
So there was smoke.
Glasses.
Yeah, but there was smoke. But she's still alive. She seems perfectly fine when, she speaks. Like that obviously was not true, that whole conspiracy theory. So, I mean, I do think that there's a lot of criticism to go around about imperfect media, left, right, center, whatever. I do think that the questions about the Russia coverage writ large are fair. I mean, I never said that Donald Trump. I mean, there was a lot of breathless coverage. Did CNN never participate in it? Did I never participate in it? I'm not saying that. Of course, everyone did. Everyone in the news.
I did. I was at CBS News, and I remember we wouldn't even stack a show until 6 o'clock at night because we were like, something's gonna drop, and we're just gonna run to it.
Jake, we got one last question for you. I want to go back to the Clooney thing, the Clooney quote that you mentioned, because a lot of people on our show, they are tuning in for a reckoning of sorts with public health, and a lot of this has to do with this new administration coming in, upending things that systems that have been in place, whether it's vaccines, public
Yes,
health,
vaccine,
research,
and
like
vaccine.
worlds have been flipped upside
Yep,
down.
100%.
So I want to read you the Clooney quote, his analysis. He said, Democrats deceived the country about Biden's abilities, and that's how Trump won.
Yep.
So in some sense, everything that we've been covering on our podcast for months now might all go back to this original sin.
This
I mean,
health
is
issue.
yeah. Is this how you, do you agree with Clooney in that analysis?
I don't know what would have happened in the choose your own adventure if Joe Biden had said, I'm not going to run for reelection, and there had been a robust Democratic primary process, and you had Whitmer and Shapiro and Warnock and Harris and Newsom. I don't know what would have happened. I can tell you what top Democrats think, which is that candidates tend to emerge stronger after primary systems. Obama's a good example of that. And that it would have highlighted all the youth and vitality in the Democratic Party, which would have contrasted with Donald Trump, because even if he presents younger than he is, he's still in his late 70s. Yeah. And that whoever emerged would have been able to, A, distance themselves better from Biden's unpopular presidency, and B, been a stronger candidate. And you can also look at the polling information, which suggests that Donald Trump was never hugely popular. A lot of the reason that he won was because of how unpopular the Democratic Party was, because of the age issue for Biden, immigration, and inflation. So I understand why they think that. I don't know what would have happened, but I certainly think that there is a compelling argument to make. But even if it's not true, it's still not acceptable to have a president who is not able to function 24/7. And we had cabinet secretaries telling us that by the end of 2024, they didn't think Joe Biden was up for that 2 a.m. phone call for a national security emergency. And thank God, as far as we know, one never came.
Yeah.
Jake, okay, one final question, and this is something we ask our guests. The name of our show is Why Should I Trust You? Why should our listeners trust Jake Tapper?
I try to be fair. I try to be honest. I try to not be ideological. I try to own up to my mistakes. I try to own up to my failings. And I try to present the truth in a way that seems to upset a lot of people a lot of times on the far left and the far right. And I mean, at the end of the day, like this last couple of days has been like a "this is your life," except instead of everybody who loves me, everybody who hates me. Just like from the last 30 years coming out and saying things. And it's just like, it's interesting, but there's not one of them that I respect. So that's at least something.
Next time, write a book about Eisenhower.
You know, he has shown up in some of my novels.
We need another Lincoln book.
Or like the Eagles or something.
I have another book coming out in the fall about terrorism. I think we can all unite.
Oh, joy.
Aren't you just a barrel of laughs there, Jake?
Seriously,
Jake. It's actually it's a really interesting story about sleuthing to lock up a terrorist. It's really actually interesting. But I think, can we all unite around Al-Qaeda is bad? Is that something that I can unite the country on?
I'm going to get back to you on that. We're going to do a poll. Jake Tapper, thank you so much. You,
the way this week has gone, people on the left and the right are going to establish a strange new respect for Al-Qaeda.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, God. Final word. No. We're going to say flowers are beautiful. That's going to be our final phrase of the show. Not that we all want to live.
It's
Jake
so
Tapper. Thank you so much for joining us, co-author of Original Sin. Find it where you find books. And I want to thank everyone for joining us on the show. I'm Brenda Akari. He's Tom Johnson. He's Dr. Mark. She's Maggie Bartlett. Send us questions at questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net. And we will see you right back here next week.